22nd of January 2024. Welcome to ICAC Unpacked. I want to talk today about the training that the ICAC people receive because it's really very sophisticated stuff. It is the stuff of quite a talented operation. It's just a shame that they don't seem to get very much results of rescuing actual children. And I'll explain what I mean by that in a minute. But what's curious is I want to start with an article that I read right after I got out of jail after they first arrested me, where I couldn't believe I was being arrested. I had talked to them and told them everything, and that was my mistake because I assumed that they would deal responsibly with this issue and that they would try to help me figure out the identity of this person who was clearly being trafficked, and all of it was to my detriment because they had no such interest in doing that. They were simply adding to a statistic, as I pointed out, and getting a veteran teacher was even better. And remember, there was no sex talk, no pictures, nothing like that I deliberately engaged in because that wasn't what I was there for. And that's important because ICAC claims in their training that they're dealing with reactive stings of children currently in harm. But what they really do is deal with proactive stings, looking out for what might be there. And whenever you get involved in that, that is a whole other realm that makes it very uncertain, very prone to abuse. Okay, so I want to start out when I got out of jail after I was arrested. I was stunned. I didn't know what was going on, but I knew I needed help and I needed information. So I started doing what everyone does, researching, trying to find a good lawyer, trying to find out the details. So one of the first articles, the first one that I ran into was an article in the New York Times. And this article in the New York Times took a very interesting stance, and I nearly fell out of my chair. It talked about how police commanders were literally pleading with rank and file officers to stop going on dating sites and posting ads to meet up with 15 and 16 and 17-year-old high school boys and girls. And they were very adamant and very open, these rank and file officers, and there were hundreds, as I remember, it was 300 or 400. And they were out there trying to engage sexually with kids. And these officers pleading with them. And I went, wow, how many were arrested? Turns out 0 were arrested. They just were saying to people, please don't do this. This is making us look bad. I mean, we're supposed to catch people doing this sort of thing. So it's curious, though, that they had no problem coming after people like me and others who had no intention and given no indication of wanting to do that. Now, that's not to say that people weren't also trying to engage in that. That's not to say that people aren't being trafficked or that things aren't happening. If anything, it's saying that police are the same form of life. But maybe it does suggest that there's another way to deal with this situation. Because police know in their own training that most of the situations they find themselves in are not what they claim. In other words, they claim reactive stings. Okay? Mom and dad call the police. They say that their daughter is being inappropriately approached by adult men or women or trying to be coerced into doing things that she feels uncomfortable, and would they please look into it? So they look into it, and as they're supposed to do, that child, that person is supposed to be on the line engaging with the suspect, and the police are supposed to be listening. And that's, what we learned since we're little kids. What actually happens is the police take the phone, they impersonate the individual, the individual child, which they're not supposed to do legally. That's against impersonation. That's against federal and state code a lot of times. And they arrange a meeting and then they create an arrest. What they do in that middle part, what they say to the suspect, is not what they claim in their training that I have in front of me. Not at all. So, in fact, they have in their training all about how to do these reactive stings. But that's not the majority of the stings they do. Most of them are proactive. They hang out on a dating site, they pretend to be someone else, they create an adult profile, and then after 100 messages, they switch it up, and pretend to be a child. That's what they do. Okay? And if you don't immediately disengage, as my case demonstrates, no sex talk at all, constantly talking about taking a proactive stance, disengaging at various times when I wasn't getting information, only later asking for a phone so that I could contact a parent or get information, and very reluctantly going to a meeting where, when I was surrounded and arrested, there was no paraphernalia, there was nothing in my car as they expected. Why? Because that wasn't what I was there for. And I've done this several times. I worked with Big Brothers, Big Sisters programs. I've worked with the Scouts. I've done lots of 4-H clubs. I've done lots of different things. So it's really important to understand that their training all has to do with something that they do 10% of the time. That's the public training. But they engage in far more insidious private training where they teach people how to set up people like me. Okay? And I'm going to talk about the differences between them a little bit here as we go along. So you can find many educational classes that ICAC does that's only open for ICAC people. In fact, it's so sophisticated that they actually have a clearinghouse, a couple of them around the country. One is at a technical college in Appleton, Wisconsin, called Fox Valley. And if you go on the Fox Valley site and try to register for classes like you're an 18-year-old, you will not find this component in there, okay? It's done by the National Criminal Justice Training Center, and it's very, very hard to find. So what are some of the topics that they cover? Surely they would cover, how to entrap somebody, how to, what language to use, how to pretend to be a 15-year-old. All of those are missing. All of those are missing from a lot of their formal training at these clearinghouse, these reactive trainings, which they use 10% of the time. Why is that? Why do you suppose they don't have these other ones? They would argue, well, we don't really do that. But we have found evidence of training modules, when they used to be posted online, exactly what they would do. How to talk like a 15-year-old, how to use technology to bust somebody, how to use Celebrite, how to break into people's computers, all of that sort of thing. As it's becoming more public, they're pulling it back. In fact, when we called the Department of Justice to ask them to verify some of the training materials, because they had specifically prohibited ICAC officers from doing the illegal and immoral and unethical things they were doing, but later training manuals allowed them to do it, we wanted to know which one is true. When did this happen? They refused to answer our questions. They demanded to know where we got the materials, and they hung up the phone. And that was about 3 years ago now. So basically, in fact, we should have our own seminar series about what ICAC does and how to avoid it. Maybe that's a bunch of training modules that I'll put together at some point. So what sort of topics do they have formally? Well, some of them are good, like sextortion, how to curb sexual abuse, online safety for kids, community relations, which I think is a curious one, right? How to get along with your community, how to get people like you to support them in their mission as long as you don't ask too many questions, of course. Other items show how to use technology to nab those who exploit children. Wonderful, good, okay? But others would surprise you. How to deal with cold cases, how to deal with tribal justice issues, because trafficking on reservations is a concern, apparently. and I've heard this before. I'm just looking over the list here. Things of that sort. How to deal with cold cases. I think I said that one too. Um, so what's interesting is that they don't do these things very much compared to the proactive things, which is 90% of their business, as I keep saying. And yet they have this vast array of training in these other areas that they don't spend as much time on. And I think that's very interesting. It's very questionable. And my guess is if they told you what they really did, which I will tell you, which some of our people will tell you, you wouldn't be quite so supportive of all of their efforts. So when you look at the studies that people use to try to, when I say people, I shouldn't say that. All the studies that are used to analyze the type of programming that DOJ will use and some other government watchdog agencies will use to sort of monitor the progress, not to hold them accountable really, but to monitor their progress and how well they're distributing their technological and educational resources to meet the goals of Protect Act of 2008. It's interesting that they almost always ask the police what we, the public, what our public money could be better spent on. And the police, of course, will say, well, give us more money and we'll do more with it. They always ask for more technology, and they always say how proud they are of the work that they do and how they love pretending to be 15 and 16-year-olds because there's an art to it and they like playing a game. It's like setting a trap. And even when our people like me who have been captured in these things and stuff, we say, hey, you don't sound like a 15-year-old. You don't sound, especially me, okay, because I worked with 14 and 15 and 16-year-olds for many years, okay? But I was sensitive to other things, like I had training in trafficking, in suicide ideation. And of course, they spent a lot of time setting the trap. And at some point, I'm going to go into how they set the trap in greater detail, as I've said before. But in their studies and in their analysis of their own training, they never ever ask people who have been caught in the stings, who have issues with the stings, who bring up relevant points about the stings. They don't even ask the public. They always ask the officers in question. And in fact, they spend a lot of time in other companion areas talking about how the police need mental health training because they see all these terrible images of child pornography. And yet they never say exactly where these occur. But they must occur, if they occur at all, on the deep and dark web. But we have seen that they've mentioned cases such as mine and others. Oh, the images are just horrible. First of all, there's no images often ever mentioned. There is talk, and even the talk isn't always that explicit. And what they don't tell you is some of the most explicit talk that does enter in are initiated by the police, fostered by the police, continued by the police, all the way along. So the police do a lot to set up these things the way they want, and as I've reported out, they get further and further along on that branch, getting more and more disgusting in the things that they will say to try to get any interest in you, including, insulting your masculinity, as I've said, taunting you, saying all sorts of absurd things that many kids don't even say, okay? And so it would be nice if these studies actually approached people who have been entrapped and asked them about what techniques are being used to get the other side of the perspective. We have written to the Department of Justice, we've written to the General Accountability Office on this many times, asking them to change their methodology and include other people. We've done it at the state level out in Washington State. And what we're finding is that they just don't have any interest and really getting at the core of what's going on. Even though that's part of their mission, is to see how well the police are doing what they're supposed to be doing. In effect, the police are not. So that's just a little bit about the ICAC training. They're very sophisticated. They have complex modules, but what they claim in their public setting is not always what they do in their private setting. Where in the private setting, they focus on how to entrap people who really there's no evidence they had any interest or inclination in having relations with children at all. So that's all for this edition. Next time I'm going to go into greater detail about the entrapment defense to begin with. This is Norman Michael Asian, ICAC Unpacked.